Hello, my name is Dan Bogdan, and today I'm going to talk about the difference between constructive criticism versus ordinary criticism. And I'd like to start by asking you two questions. How many of you ever felt that you have to criticize somebody who didn't agree with your opinion? Somebody? Thank you very much. How many of you now happen to feel that he has to be criticized when he fell short on meeting somebody else's expectations or desires? Thank you. Well, I think Abraham Lincoln got it right when he wisely concluded that he has a right to criticize who has the heart to help. And that's very important because that's the very core principle in constructive criticism. Looking at the title, you might ask yourself, what does he mean by constructive criticism? And what I mean is very simple. Whenever I'm criticizing you, there's going to be constructive criticism. And when you criticize me, that's obviously going to be destructive. Now, obviously you got the joke, but in all seriousness, I would like to move forward by sharing with you the true meaning of constructive criticism. And I'd like to start doing that by revealing first what constructive criticism is not. As you can see, criticism is not constructive when it's not transformational. And whenever you open your mouth, you have to consider first if the desire of your heart is really to help or is focusing on the person and it's rather faulty and manipulative, and you have the desire to punish rather than to help. Last but not least, criticism is not constructive if it does not contribute to any improvements. And also criticism is not constructive if it is not addressing the issue. Whenever criticism is being focused on the person, almost always the whole process becomes merely an exercise of self-obfuscation, generating nothing more than faulty and nonsensical findings in the process. And while we find out what constructive criticism is not, let's see if we can figure out what constructive criticism is. And while we are looking on the definition that I put up on the screen, I would just like to point out that the main difference between ordinary and constructive criticism is that when you are criticizing somebody, the main focus should be that that person is not automatically deemed wrong or faulty by default. So in saying that, what I would like to point out, as PM40 stated, whenever we turn our back on good criticism, we do so at our own peril. So we would rather be careful on what we are saying and what somebody else are saying to us. So what I would like to keep in mind today, and that's probably going to be the most important thing, is the 4 C's of criticism. And that's important because criticism, in order to be constructive, has to be civil, has to be conciliatory, has to be credible and considerate. And probably the most important thing for criticism in order to be constructive, it is that it has to be considerate. And whenever we are criticizing somebody, we have to have in mind the redemptive aspect and be not focused on futile and nugatory and nonsensical personal accusations. These 4 C's are actually the foundation of constructive criticism. And while these are the foundation of constructive criticism, there are also 3 pillars that we can build in order to hold this kind of edifice, wonderful edifice of constructive criticism. And those 3 pillars are nothing else than think differently, talk differently, and act differently. And that's very important as well because, as I said, everything in life starts with a thought. You know the famous saying, sow a thought, you reap an act, and so on, until you eventually reap a destiny. And it all starts with a thought, but it doesn't end up there. We have to move forward. Talk differently doesn't necessarily mean talk more. You should talk less and say more. Because talking, it's almost like throwing a stone into the ocean. When you do that, you cannot take it back. Pretty much the same is with our words. Once we said it, we cannot recall it. We either harm a person with our words, or we are blessing that person. Then we have to know and understand that talking and thinking differently are the prerequisite for acting differently. And constructive criticism is and cannot be constructive unless it comprehends of all these 3 steps together. The sum of thinking and talking is acting differently, and that is what will make a difference. While we saw the 3 steps that we should focus on, what you see on the screen right now is the 3 steps that you should never focus on. And the only reason I put them up there is because you should know what you should not focus on. In mathematics, there is a possibility where you add two numbers and come up with a positive outcome. That's not going to be the case in constructive criticism. Fact is, whenever our criticism is focusing on negatives, it is destructive, not constructive. So I would just like to summarize by saying that whenever our criticism is focused towards blaming the person, and it has the approach towards the one criticized in a self-righteous manner, we will always miss the target. While you are looking on the screen and see the goals that I have in mind when I prepared this presentation, I would like you to follow the thoughts with which I would like to reiterate my conclusion. And I would like to say that whenever you are criticizing somebody, that's a serious business. You should realize that the courage to speak must always be matched by the wisdom to listen and the capacity to understand. That constructive criticism can only emerge from a sincere and honest heart, and a compassionate attitude toward the person being criticized, whoever that person might happen to be. Moreover, in doing so, both the giver and the receiver of criticism will share in the transformational goal, being entrusted with a vital perception that both of them have been helped in the process. I would like you to close your eyes and just follow me for a few seconds. How wonderful it will be if we can envision a better world where we can agree with each other despite all of our temporary disagreements and honor each other's opinion. How refreshing, how impressive, and how civic that will be, isn't it? Now, you can keep your eyes open. Thank you very much.